Welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. The book we're going to talk about today is Jerusalem, the Biography, which is about Jerusalem itself. People praise Jerusalem to the heavens. In the famous Jewish book called the Talmud, it says that if the world were divided into 10 parts of beauty, 9 parts would be Jerusalem. Not only Jews, but also the other two major religions, Christianity and Islam, consider Jerusalem a holy city. From a religious perspective, Jerusalem can be considered one of the most sacred cities in the world. As this book states, Jerusalem is the only city that exists simultaneously in both the earthly realm and heaven. It means that although the city exists on earth, followers of the three major religions consider it a heavenly place. However, the trouble lies here. All three major religions believe that Jerusalem should be their territory. For over 1,000 years, they have been fighting and waging countless wars over this issue. Why is the Middle East so chaotic? One of the main roots is the issue of Jerusalem. Even before the birth of Christianity and Islam, Jerusalem had hardly seen any peace throughout its more than 3,000 years of history. This book tells the story of such a city, with a grand and fascinating history. The author of the book is Simon Sebag Montefiore, a British scholar from the History Department of the University of Cambridge. He is currently a research fellow at the Royal Society of Literature in the United Kingdom. His ancestors once built the first Jewish residential area outside the old city of Jerusalem, so it can be said that he has a special connection to the city. The book was published in 2011 and gained tremendous popularity immediately. Clinton selected it as his annual recommended book, and Kissinger also highly praised it. We know that Kissinger is Jewish, so his endorsement should be quite representative. Prestigious magazines such as Newsweek and The Economist also gave it high praise. It received numerous prestigious literary awards in countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, and Austria. It has been translated into 35 languages, making it popular across half the globe. Why does everyone speak so highly of this book? It's because this period of history is extremely long and complex, with some sensitive areas. Therefore, it is not easy to explain clearly. It is even rarer to achieve objectivity, fairness, simplicity, and readability. So, what can we gain from this book? Firstly, it provides a systematic knowledge framework. After reading this book, you will have a general understanding of the causes, consequences, past, and present of Jerusalem's 3,000-year history. Secondly, through this knowledge framework, you will gain a better understanding of today's international affairs, especially the hot news in the Middle East. You will be able to see the ever-changing world more clearly. Lastly, as we often say, when reading history, we should focus on the big picture. From the vast scope of Jerusalem's 3,000-year history, what insights can we derive? Let's explore together. The history of Jerusalem, spanning over 3,000 years, is incredibly complex and tumultuous. Can it be summarized in a single sentence? Here, we can summarize it in our own words as a dispute over property rights among three owners. The three owners refer to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Throughout Jerusalem's history, various powers have controlled the city, but these three groups have been the most prominent. In the book, Jerusalem, 3,000 Years, the narrative follows a chronological order based on the appearances of these three parties. We will also follow this structure to discuss each owner's background, their stories with Jerusalem, and their property disputes with each other. First, let's briefly outline the basic situation of this disputed property, which is Jerusalem itself. We know that the earliest civilizations emerged in the Mesopotamian region, present-day Iraq, and in the eastern part of the Jin dynasty, which is Egypt. Later, European civilization emerged in the vicinity of Greece. Jerusalem is conveniently located in the center of these major civilizations, making it a prime location with good transportation and favorable conditions for defense due to its mountainous terrain. It is easily defensible, has water sources, and is generally suitable for habitation. Therefore, approximately 7,000 years ago, people settled there, and around 4,000 years ago, the name Salem appeared in records, which the author believes marked the establishment of Jerusalem as a city. However, at that time, this small city-state was weak and had to seek the protection of powerful figures like the Egyptian pharaohs, acting as their vassal. During that era, various small ethnic groups fought for control, and Jerusalem frequently changed hands among different rulers, including the Jews, who are the first owner we will discuss. The Jews arrived in Canaan, present-day Israel and Palestine, between the 20th and 15th centuries BCE, before Common Era, but the exact dates are still debated. They later experienced persecution by the Egyptian pharaohs. Then, the Jewish leader Moses led his people out of Egypt and back to Canaan. Those familiar with biblical stories are acquainted with this narrative, which occurred around the 13th century BCE. After Moses, successive Jewish leaders expanded their territory in the Canaan region, engaging in battles with the local Philistine forces occupying Jerusalem. By the 11th century BCE, the Jewish leader David finally defeated the Philistines, unified the land known as present-day Israel, and established the Kingdom of Israel. To distinguish it from modern-day Israel, it is generally referred to as the ancient Kingdom of Israel, with its capital in Jerusalem. The religion of the Jews, known as Judaism, is the focus of their faith, and the first half of the Bible, known as the Old Testament, originally served as their religious scripture. The Jews were deeply devout, and their religious sentiments were particularly strong. Throughout the centuries, their fortunes fluctuated, relying on religion as a cohesive force. Therefore, after David established his kingdom, Jerusalem became not only the political center but also the religious center of Judaism. When David's son Solomon became king, he built a temple on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, which became their most important religious site. This solidified Jerusalem's status as a sacred place for Judaism and a spiritual symbol for the Jewish people. In this way, the Jews became the official owners and residents of Jerusalem. However, their power was still too weak. After Solomon's death, the kingdom split into the southern and northern regions, and they were frequently oppressed by various conquerors. For example, in 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire conquered Jerusalem, burned down Solomon's temple, and took thousands of Jewish elites into captivity in Babylon. Later, the Persian Empire, under the rule of Cyrus the Great, defeated Babylon and liberated the Jews, allowing them to return to Jerusalem. They rebuilt the Second Temple on the foundation of Solomon's temple. By the way, Persia is present-day Iran, and despite the tense relations between Iran and Israel today, their ancestors had a long history of friendly relations. Afterward, the Jews continued to face hardships, suffering from conquests by Alexander the Great and his successors. In their harsh reality, they relied on religious beliefs as their spiritual support. Therefore, Jerusalem, as a religious holy site, gained increasing importance in their hearts. In 66 BCE, the Romans arrived, conquering the entire Jewish territory and transforming the region of Canaan into a province of the Roman Empire. Additionally, based on the name given by the Philistine residents, the region was renamed Palestine, which is the origin of the name. For the Jews, their nation had been destroyed, and they were unsure about their future. The entire community was in a state of confusion. However, for the city of Jerusalem, it was about to undergo a significant transformation, transitioning from being a holy place for a single Jewish nation to becoming a holy place in the hearts of people throughout Europe. This is because we are talking about the second owner of Jerusalem, the Christians, and this group is about to emerge. To talk about Christians, we have to mention Jesus. Jesus was also a Jew, born in Bethlehem near Jerusalem. Traditionally, it is believed that Jesus was born in the year 1 AD. However, current research generally suggests that Jesus was born in the year 4 AD, as stated in this book. During the time of Jesus, the influential Jewish priesthood had become corrupt and decadent. After the Jews were conquered by the Romans also supported some puppets from the Jewish aristocracy to help them rule. One example is the infamous Sadducee family mentioned in the Bible. Many Jews were dissatisfied with these circumstances and hoped for a savior to come and overthrow the Romans. Jesus also opposed the Jewish priesthood, considering both their teachings and conduct problematic, so he spread his own religious beliefs. However, his views on religion were unique. This book summarizes that the main concern of Jesus was the world after the end of days. Jesus believed that the focus should not be on nationalist revolution to overthrow the Romans, but rather on the end of the world. According to him, only the righteous, those with good souls, could enter heaven during the judgment of the last days. As stated in this book, Jesus advocated social justice, but more in the afterlife rather than in this world. That's why in his famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. His core idea was to guide people's souls into heaven. His teachings and moral wisdom attracted many followers. As a result, the Jewish priesthood became uneasy, as they felt that the growth of Jesus' followers posed a threat to their status. They approached Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor stationed in Jerusalem, and accused Jesus of rebellion. The subsequent events are well known. Judas betrayed Jesus, and he was crucified. It is generally believed that this happened in the year 33 AD, although some argue it was in 29 AD. The location was a place called Golgotha, in Jerusalem. The Jewish priesthood thought that by killing Jesus, the threat would be eliminated. However, they did not expect that Jesus' disciples would continue to spread his teachings. They even crossed the sea to Rome to preach, which eventually led to the formation of Christianity. Afterward, two significant events took place in Jerusalem. The first event occurred in the year 66 AD when a rebellion against the Romans finally broke out, known as the Jewish War, but it was brutally suppressed. The second event happened in 130 AD when the renowned Roman Emperor Hadrian, one of the 5 good emperors, ordered the destruction of the entire Jerusalem. In its place, a Roman-style new city was built, and the Jews were expelled. The Jews rose up in resistance but ultimately failed. Since then, Jews have been scattered throughout Europe and the Middle East, with only a small number remaining in Jerusalem. However, it is no longer an exclusively Jewish city. Nevertheless, the Jews still hold a deep longing for this religious holy site. As for Jesus' disciples, they faced hardships and persecution while preaching within the Roman Empire. However, in 313 AD, their fortunes changed. At that time, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued a decree that finally recognized the legal status of Christianity. In 337 AD, on his deathbed, Constantine himself converted to Christianity, further elevating the position of Christianity in Europe. Jerusalem, being the place where Jesus was martyred and, according to Christian beliefs, resurrected, became the religious holy site for Christians. Unlike Judaism, which is mainly followed by Jews, Christianity spread throughout Europe and embraced believers of various ethnicities. All these people regarded Jerusalem as a sacred place. Moreover, these European Christians believed that Jesus' death was a result of Jewish persecution, which led to their animosity towards Jews. Therefore, before modern times, life for Jews in Europe was quite difficult. From the time of Constantine onwards, for 300 to 400 years, Jerusalem remained under Roman rule. Later, the Roman Empire split into eastern and western parts, and Jerusalem came under the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium. However, the secular ownership was not important. What mattered was that during this period, Jerusalem was under Christian control. Christians from all over the world considered it their religious holy site and spiritual home. Thus, Christians became the second owners of Jerusalem. Then came the third owner, the Muslims. Muslims are people who follow the Islamic faith. Islam was founded by Muhammad in the 7th century. Islam has two holy sites, Mecca and Medina, both located in present-day Saudi Arabia. According to Islamic belief, Muhammad once undertook a night journey to Jerusalem, so Jerusalem is also considered their third holy site. The spread of Islam is closely linked to the rise of the Arab Empire. During the reign of the second caliph of the Arab Empire, Umar, the Arabs occupied Jerusalem. Since then, Jerusalem has been under Muslim control. To explain further, the term caliph means successor, referring to the deputy of God or the successor of Muhammad, who is both the head of state of the Arab Empire and the religious leader of Islam. The situation of the three main owners of Jerusalem, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, is essentially as described. All three attach great importance to this city and engage in religious activities such as pilgrimage. However, they also have conflicts and do not want Jerusalem to be controlled by the other side. The Jews were relatively weak at that time, so we won't mention them. But both Christians and Muslims were powerful and had conflicts with each other. As a result, in the 11th century, a large-scale war broke out between these two groups, known as the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II called on Christians in Europe to crusade eastward and recapture Jerusalem. Everyone who participated in the crusade received a papal-certified cross, hence the name, Crusaders. There were a total of 8 major crusades over a span of more than 200 years. Except for the Fourth Crusade, which we mentioned in the story of Haishu, where the Crusaders and the Venetians captured Constantinople, and the Eighth Crusade, the primary target was Jerusalem. In the First Crusade, the Crusaders were successful in capturing Jerusalem and establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem. However, they had a dark history, as they perpetrated the massacre of Jerusalem. Approximately 50 to 60,000 Muslim and Jewish civilians were killed. The book says that at the time, the blood reached ankle deep. This happened in 1099, nearly 1,000 years ago. Although there have been battles between Muslims and Christians, this was their first profound enmity, which remains unresolved to this day. In 1187, under the leadership of their leader Saladin, the Muslims recaptured Jerusalem. Saladin's most commendable act in this matter was that he did not massacre Christian civilians for revenge. However, European Christians felt that the matter was not settled and organized several subsequent crusades, all of which failed. Jerusalem remained mostly in Muslim hands. It was not until 1291 that the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt completely annihilated the Crusader states, marking the end of the Crusades. Later, the Ottoman Empire defeated the Mamluk dynasty and gained control of Jerusalem. However, in terms of religious nature, they were all Muslims and could be considered the same owner. During this period, Europeans were busy with the Renaissance, followed by the Age of Discovery and the Industrial Revolution. Religion played a diminishing role in their lives, and they paid less attention to Jerusalem. This situation continued until the modern era, the 19th century. At that time, the Ottoman Empire was in decline, and it had lost control of the vast territories that were divided among new colonial powers, including Jerusalem. Throughout the 19th century, from Napoleon to the Russian Empire, these great empires had their eyes on Jerusalem, but none of them could claim it as their own. During this century, numerous cultural figures also visited Jerusalem, such as Gogol, Flaubert, Thackeray, Melville, Mark Twain, and other European and American writers. One could say that Jerusalem in this century, despite the fierce disputes, was also like a grand salon, gathering a constellation of stars. In this century, there is something quietly happening. The first Jewish owners who were expelled over 1,800 years ago are planning to return to Jerusalem and reclaim their property rights. As mentioned earlier, the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem during the Roman era and scattered around the world. Due to religious reasons, they did not fare well with Christians in Europe and led miserable lives as second-class citizens wherever they went. During the Middle Ages, there were large-scale expulsions and even massacres of Jews in countries like England, Spain, and later, Tsarist Russia. The Jews had finally had enough and believed that the reason they were being mistreated everywhere was because they didn't have their own country and could only live in the countries of others. They decided to establish their own nation, which gave rise to Zionism. The Jews decided to no longer tolerate a life of persecution in other countries and aimed to establish their own nation. In 1897, Zionist representatives held a conference in Switzerland and adopted the Zionist program. They considered various locations for their future homeland and eventually selected Jerusalem, the place where their ancestors had once lived. Zionism grew larger and stronger in various European countries, and it gained significant attention worldwide. During World War I, both Britain and Germany reached a stalemate and sought external support. Britain recognized the power of Zionism as the Jews were relatively wealthy and Zionism was a transnational organization, so they decided to cooperate with them. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration. Lord Balfour was the British Foreign Secretary at the time, and the main content of the declaration was to support the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It is important to note that they referred to it as a national home rather than a country or state. This declaration became a turning point for the Zionist movement and sparked controversy. Nevertheless, it was the strongest country in the world at the time openly supporting Zionism. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire was dismembered, and Jerusalem, including the region that is now Israel and Palestine, became a British-administered territory similar to a colony. Jewish people from all over the world began to migrate to Palestine and establish settlements. However, although Palestine had not yet become an independent country, it was not an uninhabited area. Many Arabs were living there. Now, the original owners are returning to claim their homes, but the current residents are unwilling to leave. They argue that the property rights certificates from over 1,000 years ago have long expired, and they have no reason to vacate their homes for the returning Jewish owners. Thus, tensions between Arabs and Jews gradually escalated, and they also resisted the British, demanding independence and the annulment of the Balfour Declaration, as well as restrictions on Jewish immigration. As the trustee of the region, Britain proposed a plan in 1937 to establish two separate states in Palestine, one for the Jews and one for the Arabs, with Jerusalem as an international city under British administration. However, the Arabs strongly opposed this plan, and it was not implemented. Around the same time, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany and persecuted Jews, leading to the outbreak of World War II. Meanwhile, between World War I and World War II, there was an energy revolution worldwide, with oil gradually replacing coal as the primary energy source. The Middle East, the territory of the Arabs and other Islamic nations, had the largest oil reserves. Therefore, major powers like Britain had to support the Arabs due to oil interests and impose restrictions on Jewish immigration to Palestine, which strained the relationship with the Jewish population. After the end of World War II in 1945, the atrocities committed by the Nazis were exposed, and the world witnessed the suffering of the Jewish people. There was widespread sympathy for the Jews, and it was widely believed that it was wrong for the British to prevent them from returning to their homeland. Especially the United States, which had replaced Britain as the world's leading power, strongly supported the Jewish cause. Unable to withstand the pressure of global public opinion, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution in 1947 to establish both an Arab state of Palestine and a Jewish state of Israel in the Palestinian region, with Jerusalem as an international city. This decision was made. Then, in 1948, British troops withdrew from Palestine, and on May 14 of that year, the Jewish people declared the establishment of the State of Israel. They used the name Israel, which had been used by their ancestors, and this is how modern-day Israel came into being. However, the Arabs were not willing to accept this. They had already rejected the United Nations plan, so they were even less willing to tolerate the establishment of the State of Israel. Consequently, the First Arab-Israeli War broke out, and the fighting continued until March 1949. When the dust settled, Israel had actually gained more territory than what was allocated to them by the United Nations resolution. It could be said that the Arabs were defeated in this war. The territory that was supposed to be part of the Arab state of Palestine was divided between Jordan and Egypt, with Jordan occupying the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and Egypt controlling the Gaza Strip. Since then, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been a central issue in the region. The Palestinians, who felt that their land was taken away, have been fighting for their own independent state and the right of return for Palestinian refugees who were displaced during the war. Over the years, there have been several wars, uprisings, and negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, with various attempts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. However, the issue of Jerusalem, particularly the status of East Jerusalem, has been one of the key sticking points in the negotiations. Israel considers Jerusalem to be its capital and has declared it as such. They have built government institutions and established their administrative center there. On the other hand, the Palestinians also claim East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state and see it as an integral part of their national identity. The international community has generally not recognized Israel's sovereignty over East Jerusalem and considers it to be occupied territory. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242 in 1967, which called for Israel to withdraw from territories occupied during the Six-Day War, including East Jerusalem. Subsequent resolutions, such as Resolution 478, reiterate the non-recognition of Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem. Despite the international community's position, Israel has continued to expand its settlements in East Jerusalem and considers it to be under its full control. This has further complicated the situation and made it challenging to reach a resolution that satisfies both parties. Returning to the original Jewish property rights issue, it is important to note that it is a complex and sensitive matter. The idea of Jewish property restitution or reclaiming property rights from over 1,000 years ago raises numerous legal, historical, and ethical questions. While there may be individuals or groups who claim ancestral property rights in Jerusalem or other parts of Israel, it is unlikely that such claims would be recognized or have legal standing under the current framework. Property ownership and land tenure have evolved significantly over the centuries, and legal systems have been established to address these matters based on contemporary laws and regulations. The Israeli legal system, like that of many other countries, has its own set of property laws and mechanisms for addressing property disputes. Any claims related to property rights would need to go through the established legal processes within Israel. Overall, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the status of Jerusalem are complex issues with deep historical, political, and religious dimensions. They require careful negotiation, dialogue, and compromise to achieve a lasting and peaceful resolution. Alright, the above is the main content of Jerusalem's 3,000 years, as well as the general outline of this city and its history. Let's go through it again together. There's also the metaphor that Jerusalem is an old house with a history of 3,000 or 4,000 years, and 3 families have lived in it over time. The first owner was the Jewish people, who built the temple here over 3,000 years ago, so they considered Jerusalem very sacred. But about 2,000 years ago, the Jews were driven out by the Romans and scattered throughout Europe and the Middle East. Later, about 16 or 1700 years ago, the Romans converted to Christianity, becoming Christians themselves. Because Jesus once walked and suffered in Jerusalem, they also consider this place very sacred and became the second owners. Then, about 1400 years ago, Islam was born, and because Muhammad once traveled to Jerusalem and ascended to heaven, Muslims also regard Jerusalem as a holy site. Later, they expelled the Christians and became the third owners of Jerusalem. Furthermore, about 900 years ago, the Christians, who were the second owners, couldn't accept it anymore and organized a military campaign to fight back against the Muslims. This led to the Crusades. They temporarily reclaimed Jerusalem, but in the end, they were driven back to Europe. And then, the first owners, the Jews, who had been wandering outside for a long time and were dissatisfied with being dependent on others, wanted to return to their homeland, Jerusalem, and establish a country of their own. Over 100 years ago, they began planning for this, and with the support of Britain and the United States, and taking advantage of the global situation during World War I and World War II, they finally succeeded in establishing the State of Israel in 1948. However, the Muslims, who had already been living in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas for 700 or 800 years as the third owners, were not willing to accept it and joined forces with their Arab brothers to fight against Israel. From 1948 until now, there have been 5 major conflicts. In this old house called Jerusalem, both sides can be considered to have occupied roughly half, and there's also a portion inhabited by the second owners, the Christians. The issue of property rights for this house has yet to be resolved, even until now. That's why peace in the Middle East has been elusive. After hearing all this, do you have a better understanding of the history of Jerusalem and the background of the Middle East situation? That's the main takeaway from this book. Regarding Jerusalem's 3,000 years, that's all I have to say. Congratulations, you've finished another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel. Like and share with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you a bright future. Thank you and goodbye.